This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional medical advice. The views expressed in this podcast may not reflect the views of the Village Network. If you are struggling with mental health, please see our show notes for a list of resources.
We are so excited to have you here today. We're super excited to get fired after this interview.
Yeah, it's true. I'm anticipating my contract's going to end. And we had 2 contractors less after today.
So this is the foreshadowing on how this is going to go then, I guess. Okay.
I hope not. But I'm really excited because I think you were a couple weeks ago or a couple months ago, you joked about your headshot and you were like, I need to get that updated. And I'm pretty sure I'm the one that shot that headshot like 10 years ago. So if you need somebody to shoot it, I can do it again.
Yeah, we probably should do that again. I don't want people going on there and seeing it and meeting me and be like, oh my God, this guy's holding on to every last piece of hair he had 10 years ago.
Rich, I think you look better now. I'm going to be honest. I think you've aged well. I hope not.
Thank you, Matt.
You're welcome.
Well, no, it's like the thing about men, right? Like they
men.
always say like men age really well. So like
Not all men. Look at me.
wonderful.
Well, my son says that as the beard comes in. He's like, when that beard comes in, he's like, you age yourself like 10 years. And I said, I think it's kind of like the salt and pepper is dignified. And
exactly.
He's like, it makes you look old.
No, it's like Maxwell Sheffield on The Nanny. You know, it's like the gray.
A little bit of gray.
Yeah.
I tell myself that. That's what I tell myself. It's a dignified look.
Yeah.
Did you get your gray hairs from here, Mr. Lincoln?
I think they're from my children.
Yeah, so Rich, tell us like how you got involved. Like, tell us about your education. Like, what led you to get into, like what you went to school for, and then tell us about your first job.
Okay. Well, I went to school for health administration, is what I went. So health sciences with a concentration in administration. That was my bachelor's degree, and then coming out of college, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So. I'm trying to think. Right out of school, I was contemplating grad school. Wasn't really sure if I wanted to go to grad school. I wanted to continue playing football. I played football in college. So
What position?
I was a tight end in college. So I was a lineman when I was younger because when I was a little kid, I was always bigger than everybody else. So, put the big fat kid on the line. So I did that all through like as growing up. And then all of a sudden things, people start growing, people stop growing. And then I changed over to tight end. Couldn't be a receiver because I wasn't fast enough. So tight end kind of fit well. So that's where I ended up in college. And then I played a little semi-pro after that and then moved on as I got older to just competitive flag leagues and stuff. But I enjoyed doing that. But as I did it, I wanted a job, I guess, also that allowed me the time to get to the gym and play, especially early on when I was playing still contact after college. So I got a job at a group home working with adults with developmental disabilities because the hours were residential's 24/7 around the clock, so it fit in well to my schedule. And then I think after about a year, I had a friend who was a teacher, and they were like, you like kids. You ever think about education? So I was like, yeah, I would love to work with kids. So I went to school to get a degree in education, believe it or not. Elementary ed is what I went to grad school for. So I had the health sciences, then the concentration in health administration. And then I went back for an education degree. And I did that. I finished that up, I think, in a year and a half. I got through grad school, so I went just straight through around the clock, and then I student taught, and then I came out and I taught elementary school. I taught 3rd grade, 1st grade, and 6th grade between student teaching and teaching, and then I just kind of I realized after a couple of years it just wasn't for me. Wasn't something I saw myself doing, 30 years from
for 35 years.
It was too constricted. The classroom for me, it was too constrictive. There were too many rules on, with the kid. I didn't do well in school early on. And I should say I did better early on, but later, because the classroom just wasn't conducive for me and my personality. I can't sit for like 40 minutes, 45 minutes in that restrictive environment. And I'm more of a tactile learner where I need to learn hands-on. And the school system hasn't changed forever. So I saw kids struggling. I saw kids with behavioral issues. And I felt that the schools really weren't equipped to handle any of that. And I was still at that time working evenings and weekends in the group home with the adults with developmental disabilities because I loved the work. And after being there through grad school, I started getting some connections with some of the people there. And I had kind of moved up into like a director level role where I had my own house and stuff. So I felt like I was making more of a positive impact in that field. So I actually stopped teaching altogether and went full time.
And tell people what a group home is like. Like, what is that environment?
And would you mind just like what kind of like what sort of year time period are we talking? Was this like early 2000s?
Oh God, no, man, I'm older than that. That's like the 90s,
90s?
man.
Okay.
It was like the early 90s.
Okay, great. I'm mostly asking because I want to know. I want to know how you've seen it change then further on.
Yeah, so that was, oh my gosh. So I graduated high school in 1990. So you're talking like this is now like mid 90s. So when I first got into the field, and that was more developmental disabilities rather than like behavioral health care, which is it's different. It's definitely very different, the two fields. But the group home, the developmental disability side of it, it's like a lot of those people are in the group homes for long term. Like they're there because, especially with the adults, they're there because they don't have family to take care of them. So pretty much their permanent residency now is going to be that. Is going to be that group home. So it's very different than what we do here in behavioral health with the kids, where it's more of a transitional placement for the kids until they move on. But it's a permanent placement. So it's kind of, when you think about it, I don't know if you want to say like it's kind of sad, but I think with the group that we work with early in like the mid 90s, it was sad because a lot of the adults you got came from the state hospitals where they were like abused for the majority of the time there. So if they were 10, 15, 20 years in those hospitals, there's a lot of abuse going on. And so they really had problems functioning. The saddest part is that you kind of say to yourself when you're working with them, like, oh my gosh, like if someone got and worked with these people earlier, like what can they have been capable of right now, even with their disability? And for me, like, working like that was kind of like the most difficult part. For me, especially with a couple of the adults that I work with for a long time that everyone said, well, they're really difficult, or they didn't like them because they were so difficult. And for me, like I was thinking, like I saw like, oh my God, but like they can be so capable of doing so much more if someone would just put some time into some of them, And we've seen people, there was a kid, I say a kid in his 20s there that, my house manager when I was a staff, and this is what I'm talking about, role modeling is so important early on. So when I first started in the field, I had a house manager who was probably in his mid-20s, and so a couple of years older than me only. But, he was a great role model in the fact that I remember being in a meeting with vocational services, and he wanted to get one of the guys a job there. And they were like, no, man, he's not capable of working. He'll never work. I remember him standing up in the meeting, and he's like, I will get him a job and he will be successful and I'll show you all. And he storms out of the meeting and wound up getting him a job at a chain restaurant that was in the town of the group home, and started him working there like one night a week with a job coach. We would actually go there, sit there in the kitchen with this kid, and he would like do like food prep, and we'd sit back there with him for his entire shift and just shout at him just in case he had any issues. And started out like, a couple of hours, one night a week, started doing real good, got through a whole shift. Next thing you know, the kid's working like 2 shifts. The manager winds up getting married and looking for a house, winds up buying a house that's next door to the group home that he lives in. And like, well, if he can work more hours, like I can take him to work, like that kind of like, so, he did so well. He started working like multiple days a week. He had a full-time job. He was making money. He was doing great they loved him there. And they were like, well, we want him full-time, but you were like, well, no, he has like programming and stuff he's got to do during the day. But this is a kid that everyone said couldn't do it. And he was like, no, man, I'm not I'm not dealing with that. He could do it. So I think that's why role modeling is really important, because here's someone that you're watching saying, no, like I'm not accepting that answer. I feel they can do more. So I think I've been lucky from that early on in my career of being around people like that who wanted to break the mold and show people that they're capable of doing more than everyone is telling them they can do. I think that's so important from a mental aspect. But I worked there. I was at that first place about 10 years.
Wow.
I think it's so interesting that you, as a 20-something kid, came into this place with already so much empathy for the people who were there. Where do you think that came from in your life?
Yeah, that was kind of what I was going to ask too. Is like, what was it about behavioral health that kind of stuck compared to like elementary education? Or what's the indicator? Or
I think it was
reasoning
growing up for me. I think it was like a lot of times, especially, I mean, it's hard to say. It's like when you say like stereotypically people look at athletes as being stupid. And I remember sometimes when like growing up and being an athlete and playing sports, that even like some of the teachers would expect almost like less of you. Like, well, you can't have a brain because you
can run.
Yeah, like those two
Can't do
things
both.
shouldn't be. So how is it possible you do those both? And I remember like even I remember a science teacher, and I remember I can even play it back as I think about it. I remember the content of a conversation, and he said something to me like, I don't know, like football. Like he would actually say that to me sometimes when I would ask a question in class. Or like if I forgot to put my name on a paper, he would draw a picture of football on it. Wow. So like, you have like those kind of those stereotypes that
That's
put on
the 80s for you.
Yeah.
Could never do that in school.
You never
today.
get away with that today in school. But
No.
So I remember like some interactions like that, like early on in school. And I was a good student, like in high school. So I mean, it wasn't like, like I was a bad student. But then I had other friends who did struggle in school. But I mean, like on the field, like some of the stuff that they remembered, like being able to pick up like defensive formations and like read defenses, read offense, and remember playbooks and call audibles. And you're looking at all the stuff that's going on the field. Like it takes intelligence to remember all those things. And like my thing is like I feel like a lot of people aren't able to do that. Mm-hmm. So it's like what's not being applied in the education system where you have these athletes that can do all this stuff, right? But then they struggle in the classroom. And for me, it's like I think on the field, it's more tactile learning, right? You're doing it, you're learning it, you're reading it, you're learning from different, you have different touch points where you're learning stuff, where the school, it's one way. So I think I saw those stereotypes. So I think getting into like that developmental disabilities and seeing the limitations that everybody put on those adults, well, they came from a state hospital. They're in their 30s and 40s now, and they were 20 years in a state hospital. Like, this is it. This is their life. And being at an organization that was as good as that first organization that I work with, where I felt they were light years ahead of a lot of places at that time, taking the standpoint as, no, man, that's not acceptable. And hearing the people talk about that, I think I just gravitated towards it because of some of, even in going to school, like college for the first time, like teachers wouldn't, they want to like almost like pass athletes through. Or I remember I had my first English teacher I had that was like, listen, like, you can't write, like we need to you need to learn how to write like a paper, like a real paper, because like sometimes you do your work, sometimes you don't do your work. It's sometimes other people are doing your work. And I remember her holding me accountable in class saying like, no, like you're going to do this. And I remember her like writing a paper like with me and like having me hand it in and her like going through it like with me. And I remember like and I remember her, I can picture her in my head, know her name. I remember the teacher. She's probably the person that had the single biggest influence on me as an educator, because she was like, no, the hell with this. Like, we're going to get through this together. And that's when you're kind of like, well, I can do this. Stuff is easy. And then from there, I think from an education standpoint, like everything kind of clicked for me. So I think relating that back to the work that we do now, it only takes that one person to believe in you that can change everything in your life.
Wow.
Well, and a part of that story in that time period was that the gentleman you shared a story about, and I don't think it was on.
It was
during
one of the
recording.
other episodes, I think.
Was it where you talked
might have
about the gentleman
cinnamon
with the
story.
cinnamon story? Like when you think about those moments, I mean, Rich, as much as he wanted to kill you every day, I think was your.
Actually, let's back up here.
Yeah.
So in case people had not heard that story, can you tell it one more time?
Encapsulate it.
And this was at that first place. So,
Okay.
I mean, yeah. So he was one of the more difficult people in the entire organization, probably, and people didn't like working with them. I worked with him the whole time I was at that group home, and towards the end, he even got sick, and he went into a hospital, and I would go in and visit him on a regular basis. Our relationship got to be that good, but, I mean, he was schizophrenic, so he would just go from, like, one extreme to the next, and people would get, like, almost pissed and hold it against him. I'm thinking to myself, well, he's here for a reason, man. Like the guy is like, he's not functioning.
He can't control it.
Right. It's like that's why he's here. We're taking care of him. And I knew, like, even afterward, like, like he regretted it, because when things would happen, he'd be like, Rich, sorry. He would always repeat that because he didn't want you to be mad at him. So it's kind of like with our CPS, right? We say, like, no kid wakes up and says, today I'm going to have a bad day. Like, I don't think this guy woke up and said, oh, today I'm going to beat up Rich. Like, so every morning I'd make breakfast with him. Some mornings we'd get through it. Some mornings we wouldn't. We'd be making his oatmeal every morning. He had oatmeal and cinnamon on it. So he'd put the oatmeal in there, put the water in there. He'd nuke it up, and then he'd want the cinnamon. And looking for the cinnamon one morning, and got the cinnamon. He's putting the cinnamon in, and all of a sudden I started screaming at me out of the blue, like, cinnamon, Rich, more cinnamon. Just start throwing a bunch of cinnamon in there. And if for whatever reason, you knew, like, that was when that started happening, you knew it wasn't going to be a good morning. And he'd either try to hit me or try to grab some type of silverware and stab me with it, but it would normally lead to a very rough breakfast interaction. Mm-hmm. And I mean, people would get freaked out by it. I mean, he was a nice size guy, but I would more or less try to be stern and be like, hey, what the hell are you doing? Mm-hmm. Like, and try to avoid him physically grabbing me, but try to get him, like, to realize, like, hey, it's me, man. Like, what the hell you doing? Sometimes it would work. Sometimes it wouldn't. But I mean, I kept coming back every day.
What kept you coming back?
Yeah.
I saw the good times. I saw him when things were clicking. And so you kind of know it's in there. And I mean, I remember when I started, I remember my manager telling me, hey, listen, like, people are in and out of these people's lives all the time. If you're going to do this, you got to do it. Like, don't be one of those people who are just in and out and giving up on them. So I think when I'd had those rough days every day going home, I would kind of almost blame, like, oh, did I do something wrong? But it would always keep me coming back, hoping, saying, tomorrow's going to be better. Mm-hmm. So I think that was more a drive for me. I don't want to give up on them.
Not that I expect you to know the psychology of it, but, like, and we don't have to spend a lot of time, but, like, how would he come out of that? Is it really just like a switch, or, like, did you get to a point where, like, when he would get into that sort of, like, episode, I guess if we want to call it that you could almost, like, talk him back down to, or is it really just like a chemical thing that's, like, when it clicks off, it clicks off?
Yeah, sometimes you can talk him out of it, and you can kind of divert him to another area, or another thing that worked. If there was someone else there he had good rapport with, you would leave and have someone come in and talk, and then you would re-engage him later on. That normally worked best with him. But there were times none of that would work, and you'd actually have to you have to put him, like, in some type of a hold, because it would get to the point where he was going to really injure himself. Mm-hmm. But you can kind of see then the adrenaline kind of coming down, and then he'd be fine. But I mean, it was any combination of 2 or 3 different ways that would end.
Interesting.
But yeah, I mean, that was my first introduction into kind of like the field of behavioral healthcare.
Wow. That's quite an introduction.
Yeah, and still around. That's awesome.
Yeah. I stayed at that organization for about 10 years. I was there. I started out as direct care, and then moved up to, like, a house manager. And then I think I had a couple of houses then when I left.
And then what was next for you after that? So you left there, and
well, I met my wife at that place, and she worked there as well. And So I met her, and we wound up getting married, and we lived on Long Island at the time. And her sister already lived in Delaware. She had a whole bunch of family in Delaware State, and her dad was retiring, and he was going to move down to Delaware as well. So Mary kept telling me, "Oh, we should move to Delaware. We should move to Delaware." And her dad kept coming home and being like, "Oh, I saw this house in Delaware." He goes, "Oh my God, the property taxes are so inexpensive. It would be a great place for a young couple to settle down." And he'd leave it like on the kitchen table and like walk out of the room. And I'd look at Mary, I'd be like, "I'm not moving to Delaware, man. We live in like Long Island. It's awesome here. Like, why would I ever move to Delaware, you know?" But, like I said, my sister-in-law was down there. We had a lot of family down there, and Mary really wanted to move to Delaware. We would go there in the summers and vacation. It was like it's a great state once you get used to it from moving to Long Island. But like I said, my sister-in-law was down there. I have a nephew with special needs, so we figured we can help out there, which is a big reason I think why my in-laws want to move down there. So I had no job down there, and we were looking around at houses, and we bought a house, started having a house built down there. Had no job, was still working in Long Island, and my sister-in-law would send news clippings, because this is still back in the day when you look for a job in the newspaper. And that she would actually cut out newspaper clippings, and she would send them to me and be like, "Oh, look at this job, look at this job." And then Mary would start did my resume and started sending my resume out to places for me.
You're getting calls and I don't know you.
I'm like, "Well, if I get a job," I said, "we'd move. If not," I said, "we can just rent the house out." And she was like, "Oh, okay." So she just started sending my stuff out because I wasn't looking. So I was like, "Well, if no one calls, then I don't have a job." I said, "I don't have to move." So Mary took care of that. So her and my sister-in-law just kept sending my resume out and sending it out, and I got a call from one organization down there that was multi-state, and they did behavioral health care with adults, and they were going to expand into some kid work. But so it was a switch over from developmental disabilities to behavioral health, still in the primarily in the adult field at that point. And I went down for an interview, and things kind of clicked, and I wound up accepting that job. And so Mary and I made the move from Long Island to Delaware, which I hated for a long time. I think I might have cried myself into work many mornings in the car on my commute to work, because it was so different.
Were you a lifelong New Yorker?
I was born in Brooklyn and then moved out to Long Island later on. So that's all I knew up to that point, when I was, I think, 31, when we moved. So
you were like, "What are all these trees? Why is there so much sky?"
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, we lived on
There's
Long
nothing
Island,
to
so
do.
it was suburban, but there was so much to do. You can always go somewhere. Now you're at things closing early. Nothing's open on Sundays,
You live in Wayne County. My goodness.
Well, thank God for Delaware. Otherwise, I never would have made it here. Delaware was a nice transition getting to Wayne County. I will tell you that. But Delaware was different. But after a couple of years, I mean, there's no way you can't fall in love with it. The beaches, the shore. It's a great state to live in. I really enjoyed actually living there. We had our kids there. That's where I got a lot of my professional experience there. So I went in as a regional director over the state of Delaware. And I did that, and then my role expanded to a chief operating officer over everything in all their southern states. And then eventually I took everything in the entire organization with them, and we expanded into a lot of children's work. Towards the end, we did a lot of outpatient work for kids, expanding into a lot of outpatient work from residential. So it was a good company. The CEO there that I worked under, he was fabulous. So Joe Jobeck was his name. It's an interesting organization. There was a man there, Alan Witchley, who was the first executive director, and it was him and Joe Jobeck were I think the first two staffs ever hired at the place, and they worked at a group home together. And then Alan moved on to doing staff recruitment, and Joe took over for Alan, and they were the only two CEOs up until Joe left. Wow. So Joe started there in his 20s, retired, and the only CEO the company knew was a couple of years at Allen and then Joe. But Joe was a great role model because he was very staff focused. He was a great guy, and he always called himself, I want to be known as like the kind of like the blue collar CEO, kind of like down to earth. He didn't want to be
Has done the work sort of thing.
yeah, he wanted to, like, I came from direct care, I understand how it is, and that was his view on stuff. He was a really good guy, and we went through a lot of stuff in the organization. With like the union tried to come in, and so we had to deal with that together. And so we had a lot of experiences of expansion, contraction, financial ups and downs, union stuff that we did together. And I thought he was a really good role model for me, like as far as listening to a room, instead of just talking, like the importance of listening, getting where everybody stands on things, and just his compassion, I think, as a leader, of the way he dealt with his home life, his wife, his kids. He was a pretty amazing guy to work for too. That's why I said I think I was lucky with the leadership I had.
And that was so that sounds like it was kind of like a bridge between developmental disabilities and your exposure to behavioral health. And then as you grew then there as an organization, it became more behavioral health focused. Is that accurate?
That organization was behavioral health. So that was a total departure from developmental disabilities, 100% to behavioral health. So that was kind of like a whole new way of learning things. And then as we expanded from adults only to the kids work, so that's where I wanted to end up, was doing kids work. So I intentionally, when I got into the COO role, started to expand into work with youth.
And what drew you to working with youth in that way?
I just love kids. I love working with kids. I feel, like the adult work is really important, but when you get with the kids are innocent, and I feel like by the time you get to working with adults, like a lot of them are kind of lost the innocence of their childhood. So I like working with kids because I feel like no matter what stage you get them at, you can kind of just give them back some of that youth that they lost. Like nobody should lose their childhood, and it's such an important developmental piece of any human being is their childhood. Like those experiences, they do make you who you are later on. But you want everyone to have like a healthy childhood, or as close to a healthy childhood. So I feel like, for me, I felt concentrating just in the adult work, that you can have so much more impact in dealing with the kids.
Is that kind of that earlier intervention thing too? Where
Absolutely.
If we get there earlier, we can maybe solve more problems down the road.
Well, I think that's why as an organization, we're starting to move more towards early childhood mental health work, is because we realize that we can't do it overnight, but in little bits and pieces. If we move earlier, we can have more impact on the kids. We're not closing the other stuff that we're doing because it's so important, but we need to add that other piece to it. So I think in seeing the adults early on and the state that they were in, and getting into behavioral health care with the adults later on, and seeing the potential that they have and where they ended up with good programming, you start thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, we had better early childhood mental health programs, where would these people be right now? Because a lot of them do incredible things. And I think that was the take for me.
Got it. That's cool. That's great.
I know this is kind of off track on the story, but what you were just talking about led me to a question. The news this morning and last night was talking about how the Centers for CDC, or the Surgeon General, wants to put a warning on social media that it's bad for your mental health. The LA school district just banned cell phones. Do you think, when you're talking about these kids earlier, how do you think that's affecting them in a way that, you have kids. How do they feel about social media? How do you feel about social media?
It's funny,
Is that a fair question?
Yeah, the whole tech thing kind of blows me away, because when Mary and I were raising our kids, one of the things we would say, especially around the holidays, is like, oh my gosh, like I feel like we have no gifts for the kids. Or I always felt like, man, like, did I give my kids a bad childhood? Because I don't remember them ever like playing like with like stuff. I remember like growing up, like you had like G.I. Joe, you had like Star Wars, like you had like action figures. You had stuff like you played with. I felt like the phase that my kids had of that, and I don't know if you see that with Henry or not, but I feel like that stage is almost so small. That window, say they were going to the tech right away. Like I think like Atari came out. I was like, I might have been like junior high, like, or late elementary school before like the Atari ever came out. So like we didn't have like those gaming consoles like when I was a little kid.
Frogger.
Right. So you were outside playing with your friends or playing like Star Wars or Matchbox Cars or something. Like that's what you had. Like, you know, like the handheld things with the little dots that like the beep, like that was like the big tech, like when I was growing up. So I saw the difference between like me growing up and like my kids, like with that tech. And I always thought to my wife, I'm like, wow, like, but that's really what it was. Like now seeing them older with the social media and I think so much of even what I hear like my kids and their friends talking about is related back to like social media, TikTok, things they see on there. And like my thing is, well, you need like the whole picture of that, because like I think the scary part with social media and like a lot of things like those little videos is that kids aren't fully informed about certain topics. They're picking up these little videos and stuff, and you don't know what's real, what's not real, especially with like the AI and stuff now. They change so much stuff, so you're looking at it like, is that even real? I just feel like it's so influential and they're on it so much that I do feel it's changed everything. Some things are good because from a distance standpoint, you can stay in contact with people from a distance. The thing I don't like about it is like so much of the interaction between the kids is social media. Like, you know, with like the Snapchat, like it's just, you can have these full conversations with multiple people without actually really talking. And I don't think that piece is positive. So from that standpoint, I'm guilty where like, you know, I'm on my Instagram. I look at it, I post stuff, I'm on there. You know, my son's like, oh, you're always looking at stuff on your phone. A lot of it's like email, work stuff, but it's so easily accessible. But I also do remember the time where I left work and if anyone wanted me, they had to call me. You know, those days are gone, but everything is instant now. And I think that's another big issue. And I see myself with that too, is instant gratification. You know, you have a problem, you want it instantly solved.
Or disassociate.
Yeah.
You never have to be bored.
Right.
Yeah.
I do kind of, and we're getting off track a little bit, but I do kind of relate to, you know, I think about like a lot of people are like, oh, when you have your kids around, you shouldn't be on your phone, all this stuff. And it's like, but what about like 25 or 30 years ago when people would get out a newspaper? I mean, I'm still reading the news.
Right.
It's just, it's not a whole huge paper. It's kind of the same thing to an extent.
Right.
But then I can flip over and be in work mode like that.
Like that, right.
And so I think that's why it is a little bit different. But I mean, my daughter's 4 and the amount of pretend phones that she has is kind of unnerving.
Yeah, it is. The social media stuff and the access to the computers it's changed a lot with the home.
Yeah.
It really has, I think.
My son has called me out. He has looked at me and said, Mama, I'm more important than your phone.
Wow.
I'm like, ooh.
Yeah, my son and I just had that conversation not too long ago where, I think he started talking to me and I was talking to him, but I was finishing up an email on my phone. He actually said something to me and I got mad, but like afterwards, my wife looked at me and she's like, were you on the phone? And I'm like, oh, shut up. Like,
Yeah, but I mean,
but
beyond the justification whirlwind.
So
You have to be so intentional now.
Yeah.
It's good to be intentional, I think, and to say like, all right, I'm going to give you my full attention in this moment.
Yeah. But back to your story.
Yeah, so that might have to cut that out, and that might be more bonus content. But
I think that's a good segue in.
Rich, so you get this call from a recruiter. You're working you're in Delaware. Get this call from this recruiter.
Yep.
And tell us about that.
I'm working in Delaware. I'm at my office down by the beach in Delaware.
Which you didn't want to be at
a
bunch of years prior.
But now I'm there like 10 years. So now I'm happy, man, living the life down there. And I have my kid, I have my 2 kids and my wife and my, family's all around and everything is fine and dandy. And I got an email first from the recruiter, and I was just like, all right, whatever. And then got another email, and hey, you want to have a quick call? And I was, all right, maybe I'll just take the call and I'll see what this is all about. Because, they always say, from a professional standpoint, it's always kind of good to, if someone's interested, you go through that more or less like even like an exercise to see kind of where you size up and where your skill set is. So I'm like, it might be good to see this. And at the same time, the CEO of the company I was at was looking to transition out and had me in his succession planning to take his job. So we started doing more together to kind of take over for him. And I met with the recruiter she was out of Arlington, Virginia, which we had an office in Arlington. And we had a couple offices in the Virginia area down there. So when I was down there, after work, I had met her and we started talking and gave her my resume, and she passed it on to this company in Ohio. And I guess they liked what they saw, and they said, well, we'll talk to him. So I had my first phone call with I think it was a small group at the board of directors at that time that I started the conversation with. And that's what kind of kicked off I feel like a marathon process of interviewing with the Village Network. But the first one, we have a small board. And I remember thinking to myself, the board seemed pretty engaged, like really knowing, like having a lot of information about the organization, which surprised me, but it's like most boards don't, where I felt like and a lot of historical ties to people on the executive committee where they were like, oh, like my great grandfather was a board member, or like my grandfather did that, or my dad was a board and I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, like that generational tie to the organization was pretty incredible outside of the knowledge that they had of like how the organization functioned. I thought was pretty impressive for a board, in my opinion. So that's kind of what piqued my interest. So, but I kind of went into it. I think part of the strength of the interview was I kind of went into it like just being myself. So I was kind of like, I got a good job. I'm happy. I'm not really looking to leave. So I'm just going to answer the questions. And that's what I did. And then the recruiter called me back and said, hey, they want to talk to you again. So I was like, oh, okay. So talk to them again. And just kind of started rolling from there. Like each interview got a little more in depth, and I guess the more each of us talked to each other, we started getting a little more interested in the other side and how it worked. And it finally elevated to a point after over months where they asked me if I wanted to come out to Ohio. And I remember when they invited me out. In between the invite and me actually getting out here, I was at a dinner with my CEO in Rhode Island, and we were talking about something, and I said, hey, I just need to let you know too. I said, that place out in Ohio that called, like they're still around. And he was like, what? And I'm like, yeah, I'm actually going to be taking some vacation time. I'm going to go out there and talk to them. And like he was kind of blown away because he felt it was kind of like a dead issue. And he's like, well, I'm just letting you know, man, when it comes down to it, he goes, I'm going to go down fighting. He said, so he goes, I'm not rolling over and letting you leave when they offer you something. And I was like, well, how do, maybe they won't offer me. And he goes, they're going to wind up offering you something. He's like, there's be no reason not to. He goes, unless they call me for a reference, he said. He goes, then maybe not. But he said, I'm going to go down fighting. So I remember then coming out here and doing the interview. And I think I had a board interview. I had a like an ELT, like an executive team interview. And then they took me on a tour to see some of the programs and meet some of the kids out here.
What did you see that kind of made the decision for you?
Well, same thing. I think I saw more of the general board being really engaged in the kids, really knowing what was going on, having a relationship with the employees and the staff, at least on the executive level, where it wasn't like the board was showing up when they were like, it wasn't awkward. Like you can kind of tell, like they probably never had any interaction with them. And like now, like it was like a big act, like they actually like knew each other. So I thought that was really kind of awesome. Listening to some of the staff talking about coming up through the ranks, being regional directors or starting as a program director, things along those lines. how vested they seem in the organization, I think was impressive to me. But more so when we did the tours of the programs, hearing the kids talk and hearing them talking about the positive impact that the organization had on their lives, talking about where they were and what they were doing and where they were at that point, I kind of said to myself, like this place is fantastic, but it could be like probably so much more than what it is right now. And I think for me, that was so enticing was like looking at the size and the scope of the organization and what it was doing and kind of seeing, man, there's a lot of potential to do so much more with the resources and the talent that the organization had. It really, really sparked my interest in coming out here. And I think that piece kind of surprised everybody on the outside looking in because nobody thought I'd end up here.
So Mary kind of dragged you out to Delaware. Was it the reverse coming to Ohio?
This was payback.
Oh wow! Well, and share that part of the story where you were like, if you're comfortable sharing the story when you got the job offer, because I think this kind of ties to the question.
Yeah, well, when I came out from the interview, I went back home. I think Mary thought, all right, he went out and this is kind of it, is what her thought pattern was. And so I got back and I came home and she goes, how did it go? And I started talking about like the kids and my interaction. And I remember Mary looking at me and saying like, almost with shock, she's like, you're considering this? And I was like, no, we got the kids, it's a big move. Because you're established. It's a big move when you're moving with a family, right? But it's not just me. You got to take your kids and your wife and everything into account when you're making a move like that to a place where I know nobody, have no roots, you know what I'm saying? So if it goes sideways, it's me, Mary, and my 2 kids in Worcester, Ohio. So I was like, no, not really. And Mary's, she's looking at me. She's like, listen, she goes, you seem really excited. She goes, if you really think, based on all the work that you've put in to this point, if you really are considering this, she goes, I'm 100% behind you. She goes, if it's something you decide to do. I don't think she really meant it. I think she said it. I don't know how much she really meant it, but yeah, she said it. So I put a lot of time into thinking about it from there, and it was a little while passed before they actually came back and offered me the position. And when they did, and I went to Mary, she was like, what are you going to do? And she's like, and at that point, she was just like, listen, she goes, if you want to do it, she goes, I'm 100% behind you. She goes, we'll make this work. She goes, it'll happen. And I didn't know what to do. I really didn't know what to do. I was so nervous about making the move that I remember like vividly, like the deadline that they gave me, it wound up being like a Thursday. And I remember the Wednesday before, I still really had no idea what the right move was. But there were so many events leading up to it, like as far as signs that made me believe it was the right thing to do. And it's funny, I was just talking to my kids about it the other day, and one of my kids was like, man, that's kind of spooky. Because I'll tell you, there's one story, we were in an airport, and I flew all the time for my last job, flew at the same gate, same flights. It was, same pattern. One of the times I was out there, probably a week prior to making my decision, I'm in the airport, I'm hungry, looking for some food. There's some little old lady with this, like, I think it was like a Wolfgang Puck sandwich cart or something. Never there before. And I'll tell you this, never there again after this interaction. And I'm like, I'm going to go get a sandwich. There was no one else online. Go up, grab my sandwich. A woman turns around, looks at me, and she said, you seem to have a lot on your mind. She goes, something heavy's weighing on your mind. And I looked at her and I said, yeah. I said, I got some big decisions to make. And that's all the detail I gave her. The lady gives me my bag, gives me my change. She like puts her hand on my hand, looks at me, and she says, whatever decision you make would be the right decision. She said something like, just have faith. And I was like, holy crap. And I thanked her, and I flew out of that airport about a handful of times after that, never saw the cart, Never saw the woman again. It was really weird. Mary believes it was an angel. That's what she believes. Maybe, but it was just a really kind of odd interaction to have that made me really start thinking maybe I should just ride it out, and I'm in a good place now. This obviously then can be this is really what I want. Maybe it won't be as bad. So that's what kind of started me thinking down that direction. About a week later, my nephew is getting surgery. He's getting a rod put in his spine. He's at the children's hospital, and the whole family's up there, and we're in the waiting room. And my kids are little at that point. My son might be 8 years old at that point, and he's playing hangman in the on the computer at the hospital. And early that day, my kids went to Catholic school. So early that day, I dropped them off on my way into work. So I dropped both my kids off, and I went over to the church. And I'm like, and this is Wednesday now, and I need to give the village my answer on Thursday. So I go over and I start praying. And I remember I pray, and I said, listen, God, I said, I need a sign. I need some help here. I said, I got married. I have the kids. It's a big decision. Am I ready for this? It's a big move. I don't know what to do. Just let me know where you want me. Where am I supposed to be? Just let me know. Give me a sign. And then I said, make it an obvious sign. I said, because I am dense. It is not obvious. I'm going to miss it. I go, make sure if you give me the sign, I know that this is the sign. I remember saying that. Went to work that day. Now, fast forwarding to the hospital that night, my son's playing hangman, and he knew, I was telling everyone I went and prayed on it. And my son's like, Mom, Dad, you got to come here and look at this. And we look at the screen, and Mary's like, what the? She's like, oh, you typed this in? Did you pick the word? He goes, no, I was guessing. This is the first word I guessed. The first word he guessed on the hangman game he was playing was Ohio. And Mary turns around to me and she goes, you got to take that job. You're going to burn in hell. She said, if you don't. She goes, it doesn't get any more obvious than that. And the next day, I called Lynn Muma, who was the board chair at the time. And I told her, I called Joe first, told Joe, listen, I'm going to take the job. And, he was happy, but not happy. And then I called Lynn and I told her I was taking the job. And that's how I went. That was my deciding factor on coming here. And that was almost 12 years ago.
Wow.
I feel like this is enviable on two levels. First, how many people get an opportunity in life where they have two people who want you to be CEOs of two organizations that you would love to work for? So that's awesome. And second, how often do you get signs like that? That is fantastic.
Yeah, I thought it was, I don't really kind of believe in that kind of stuff. I have faith. I believe that there's a God, and I'm Catholic, but I also believe that you get opportunities, and you need to. God gives you opportunities, and it's kind of what you do with them. My family believes in just the opposite of He gives you signs, and this is the way things work. So I don't know which one of those two it was.
A nice hybrid combo of both.
Yeah, but all I know is in seeing it, I didn't want to risk it, and I said, listen, obviously maybe He does want me there, and that's where I'm going to go. Darn it, and it's been good for me. It's been good for my family, I think, and I think it's been good. I'm hoping it was good. It was a good move for the village.
Pretty sure it was.
I think
you
it
look
has
at our
been.
annual reports.
It
tells the story.
I'm here, so thank you.
You have a great hiring decision. I just want to put that out there.
Rich, when you look at what you've accomplished here, you have to be proud. When you think of the number of kids we're serving every year, and now we're doing county services statewide, we're growing into other states that border us. That's pretty impressive. When you look at the annual report the year you got here versus the one we just put out, that's obviously you have forward vision and thinking. That you have taken us somewhere.
Appreciate that.
Sometimes it's anxiety, I'm going to be honest, but but you also inspire us to do great work, and I think that's the fun part. I always tell you, you're my favorite CEO because you're real and you tell us how you feel, and I think we all love that. But when you think about that time here, what's your proudest moment? Where do you think, wow, of all the things we did, I'm so happy we made this decision?
Oh my God, so much has happened in the last 12 years. It's so hard. I think I'm just most proud overall of the journey that we've taken as an organization. And like when I look around at the people who are here now that were here at the beginning, I think transition's never easy and change is never easy. And I think there was a lot of change. So I think to see the people who have hung in there through some of those really difficult times is what makes me most proud, that they had faith in the process, maybe faith in me, faith in the organization, but that they put their faith and trust in the process of where the village was going to get us here is the thing I'm most proud of. I mean, you know, I don't even know the hundreds of thousands of kids. I mean, like I'm proud 100,000 times over for each one of the kids who have like successfully passed through the program and can actually say my life is better because of my interaction with the village. I mean, each one of those instances is a proud moment for me. But I mean, I think I've put a lot into the organization. I was met with Matt. We had breakfast this morning, who's my board chair, and I told him this morning that, you know, I look at the organization. I know it's not mine, but I look at it like it's mine. I feel like I've just put so much into it that there's really no separation between me, I think, and the village in my mind right now, because I just love the place so much. So I think I've evolved a lot in my time here. So I think I've probably learned just as much from the staff and the organization as a whole as maybe that I've given to it. So that I have a lot of pride in that as well.
I think, I mean, being a business owner, I think ultimately you're really just trying to steward what's here, right? You're just trying to, you know, you've been given something and the board said, we're going to trust you with this. And so you just want to do right by it. But because you're so deeply involved, it becomes somewhat personal.
Yeah,
even
absolutely.
though ultimately it could transition to somebody else when you're ready to move on and all that sort of stuff. But you want to make sure that it's in that place. I'm going to steal Lynette's question because I'm talking now, if that's okay.
Go for it.
How do you, so with stewarding that, obviously the Village Network is in a different place today than it was before. And how do you take an organization from where it was, grow it to as large as it is, keep it a nonprofit, and not focus on dollars and still focus on service? How do you balance those two? Because it takes the dollars to run the service.
Yeah, it's
But
kind
how do you balance that?
So we just had this conversation, one of the regions that they were kind of struggling a little bit, and rather than like going in as an administrative team and saying, hey, listen, this is what needs to be done to fix it, we put it back on the region and said, hey, listen, like looking at these gaps, what's the plan? You know, and thinking that let's make this a learning opportunity. I think one of the discussions we had was this, that if we were doing, I personally feel that if we're doing things right on the clinical aspect of providing the services, I think a lot of the finances and everything else kind of works itself out. Because if we feel we have fantastic clinical models that we use to work with the kids, if we're training those right and the staff embraces them and they're implementing them, we feel that the issues, I'm not going to say the issues won't be there because, you know, we have some difficult cases. What we have to deal with on a daily basis should be less than what it would be if you're doing bad clinical services. So if we can minimize like the rough days that the staff is having, if they can be invested because they know that they're implementing good clinical models and have good tools to do their job. If you do all that stuff, you should see good progress in the kids. They should have success. That should inspire the staff. The work is going to be done. Then it's just a matter of you document that work, because people say, well, documenting of the work that's about the money. It's really not. It's about you're documenting the progress of the kids, because you need to pass it on from, you know, your behavioral management specialist to your therapist. The process is really important from the intake worker coming in, whether or not it's the person answering the phone, to the doctor at the other end. Every single one of those pieces are very critical. And I feel if we're operating at 100% at each one of those touch points, the financial piece at the end is going to work out, because you're going to get the grant, you're going to get the RFPs based on the reputation of the work you're doing. That's going to handle a lot of your financial stuff. If you're doing the work that needs to be done, you're going to be pulling in the billables that you need to cover your expenses. So I think all that goes hand in hand. And I think when you look at the programs that are doing really, really phenomenal from a financial standpoint, they're the ones that are most likely doing the best clinical service as well. Everything kind of feeds into each other.
Most people that aren't doing good work don't document that they're doing poor work.
And I try to explain. Yeah, I mean that's one of the big things that I say all the time. It's kind of like if you go to a doctor, if you go to your primary care doctor, right, and you're not feeling well, and he refers you to a specialist, then you go into the specialist, and the specialist is like, all right, well, what's wrong with your arm? Well, it's not my arm. It's I'm having these migraine headaches, and they're looking through the notes. Well, the last thing I see from like 6 months ago is you were there for your arm. Well, no, I just went to go see you're going to be pissed off that your doctor didn't translate. It's the same. It's no different here.
Right.
It's very important to document. So when the BMS is passing it on to the therapist, it's going on to the nurse, the doctor, that everything is in there because you need a complete medical record so people can work together and document from that. From those notes as to what's going on with our kids, so we're getting them to the right place. That's why that documentation is so important.
Especially because a lot of the work you do isn't really even physical; it's all mental.
You're dealing
and
with
how
the
do you
head,
how
right.
do you communicate that? There's no physical ailment or
Right.
what that has to be communicated through documentation. That's the only way.
Right. So that's my key in the whole thing is like don't document for the billing. Document for the proper communication of what's going on with the youth, because that's going to help us develop a roadmap into getting them better. So that's why I think the documentation is most important, and I look at it from that aspect. But the other thing you got to preach too is that it's no matter what you're doing, it's important. And I have a million stories of people who work here that interact with our kids and have positive effects on their life that are not direct care workers. Just because they're vested, they talk to the kids, they interact with the kids, and you have no idea how much those interactions mean. And I think that's a good culture to have in an organization, is that when you're looking at your person answering the phone and they're saying, I've been in meetings with staff and I called and they had questions, and I remember one of them, someone had a question and I asked, and they're like, well, I'm just a secretary, over at this program. And I'm like, well, let's stop right there. You're not just a secretary over there. And she was like, well, I don't really do much. I just answer the phone. And I said, well, when someone calls in crisis, I said, did they call your number? And she's like, well, yeah. And I'm like, okay. I said, so if you give them bad service, I said, everything goes sideways from that point out. So you're the first point of contact. That's super important for anybody calling in crisis. So you don't undershoot yourself. And I believe that, going back to Joe Jobeck, my CEO, who tells, I believe it's a made up story. He says it's not, but I think it's a made up story. But it's a great story of the janitor at NASA, the people going on a tour of NASA, he said, and he's like, that they're going through this tour and they're talking about everything that they do, putting people on the moon and all the research and the engineers and all like these. And the janitor's coming through and someone on the tour asks, hey, what do you do here? And he turns around to the group and he says, I help put people in space. Because it's not like I'm not here. He's part of a team and he has a function there. And if their goal is to space exploration, that's what he's part of, that ultimate goal. And I think
he might not be doing math,
but he's an integral part of making all of that happen. And I think if you come to work here, no matter what it is you're doing, you're playing an important role in helping kids get better and move on to a better life, no matter what your role is. If you're a secretary, if you're maintenance, if you're cleaning, you're all playing an important part in that. And I think that's as we get bigger, if we can keep that mentality, I think we're going to be fine.
That's great. Sorry, I stole your question.
No, I actually think that you wrapped this up beautifully. Like that, what a great point to end on. I have nothing to add. No notes.
Can the last thing we ask is just like, you've taken the Village Network from where it was to now 12 years later. What are the next 12 years, Rich?
People ask all the time where I think we're going to be by the time I leave, and I can't answer that because I really don't have, when it comes to kids and behavioral health, it's really hard to have a roadmap as to where you're going to be. There are lots of things that when I first started, me and Rick Rodman working together, there's lots of things we said we probably wouldn't do that we wound up doing because it wasn't the best interest for the kids. So I think we're going to be, in the next 10 years, I think we're going to be bigger, better than we are today. I'm confident in saying that. And I know for a fact that we'll be doing things where we're focused on what's in the best interest of the kids in that generation. And wherever that brings us is where we're going to be. So it can be the same size, serving the same kids. It can be twice as big. I don't know. But I do know that in the next decade, we're going to be bigger and better than we are right now with more improved services for our kids.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Rich.
Thank you.
Guys. I
Rich.
appreciate it.